Hey everyone, and welcome to Star Wars Anatomy. All forms of entertainment which depict two sides, similar in nature but different in action, invariably starts a fan war of which is better. And when it comes to Star Wars, there is only one question: Jedi or Sith? In a tale as old as 1977, people have been asking, would you be light side or dark side, comparing and contrasting the two religious groups of Force users. Today, we are going to be focusing on one half of this argument, going over the history of the energy-wielding mystics who refer to themselves as the Jedi Order. Note: this work includes both canon and legends information, and thus is subject to change and discrepancy. The Jedi Order is a monastic group of peacekeepers that share a common view of the universe-spanning energy known as the Force. But where do they come from? Who formed them? And why do they choose to live the way that they do? At one point, notable Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi is quoted as saying, "For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic, before the Dark Times, before the Empire." But what does that actually mean? Do you even have a clue how many years 1,000 generations is? What were the Dark Times, and what did the Empire do to change that? The short answer is no one really knows for certain, at least not canonically. However, there is a pretty prolific amount of Legends lore for us to delve into. Note: it does get a little complicated because there were a lot of schisms. No, seriously, a lot of schisms. There were like 4 of them. That being said, all the lore of the extended universe leads us to the planet of Tython, which is located in what is commonly known as the Deep Core. This map does not depict its location because no one is sure where it is exactly. But this planet does take a central place in the ancient stories of creation and formation of a group of Force users who would one day be known as the Jedi Order. According to Restley Quist, a chief librarian of the Jedi Order and caretaker of the First Knowledge, says the following: "The Force is timeless, but we Jedi have not always been present to interpret its teachings. Centuries before the founding of the Republic, our predecessors first heard the Force's call on the deep core world of Tython. The seers of Tython knew of the energy field as Ashla, but understood it in much the same way we do today, as a source of wisdom, a regenerative pool from which to draw strength, and a way to move objects without touching them." From this, we can extrapolate that the seers of Tython were the beginning of Force using, at least as we know it. She also goes on to express that the same seers use their abilities in the service of hatred and greed, which means that the idea of Sith may be older than that of the Jedi, rather than the other way around. Before the Force Wars of Tython, there were no Jedi or Sith, just those who had Force abilities and a desire to understand them. The war eventually took place 25,793 years before the Battle of Yavin, and actually began as a poorly executed invasion by the Rakatan Infinite Empire. It would eventually become a fight between the followers of Ashal, the light side, and the followers of Bogan, the dark side, thus creating a cycle that continues on for over 40,000 years. It should be noted that this was before the discovery of the lightsaber. It is agreed that after this time the Jedi first ventured out into the galaxy, but they weren't a singular order just yet, just an order that believed in using their gifts with respect. After a little bit of wandering, planet Ossus became a sanctum of the light-sided Force user mentality. When the Republic, remember how I asked how the Republic was going to factor into things? Was founded a few thousand years later, the Jedi promised to take part and uphold the ideals of exploration, knowledge, and justice. The Jedi began to discuss and practice their mystic craft in different ways, and, like any group that gets together to make things happen, subgroups formed. There are 3 semi-canon orders that are said to have been the real precursors to modern Jedi. Most of these were formed before and during the Force Wars, though continued on into a time before the schisms. They were the Order of the Diven, the followers of Palawan, and the Katos Academy, which is shrouded in a great deal of mystery, but was known to end up on planet Palawan, similar to the followers of Palawan. How and why is unclear, especially since the Jedi were supposed to be on Ossus until much later. The Katos Academy has very little in the way of established history, canon or otherwise. What is commonly believed is that this order had monastic warriors called the Paladins, whose ethics and training would inspire what is now known as the Jedi Knight. Then we have the followers of Palawan. They were seekers and explorers who believed that in studying the Force they would better understand it. They were also the steadfast believers that midi-chlorians and the energy field known as the Force had some sort of symbiotic relationship. They had perfected a trance-like state that would allow them to sleep for long periods of time without aging. However, a large amount of these Jedi fell to the dark side during the First Great Schism. Most notably was Arden Lyn. Remember that name. It'll be really important here in a moment. The last order, and most prolific, was the Order of Diven. Around 36,453 BBY, roughly 10,000 years before the Force Wars. Yep, we are jumping backwards in time, just keep up with me. A group of Force-sensitive monks from the planet Thape, am I pronouncing that right? Were brought to the planet of Tython where they met the Force users there. It is this meeting and the exchanges of ideology and mysticism that became the foundation of the Jedi belief system, and may have instigated the continuing conflicts later. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot. The First Great Schism, one of four, remember, occurred in 24,500 BBY. During the years between the Force Wars and this time, the Jedi were beginning to carve out who and what they were, and more importantly, who could be one of them. This exclusionary view ruffled some feathers, or at least one bionic arm. Arden Lyn, I told you to remember the name, see, it's important, previously stated as a follower of Palawan, and her lover, yes, Jedis could still have lovers at this point in time, Zendor, were the forerunners of this huge break of Jedi. I think that the entire war, which I plan to cover in a completely different video, can be summed up in the following quote by Jedi Denzogoro Potts. It seems too easy to blame everything on Zendar and the dark side. Maybe the Jedi were partly to blame too. What it all boiled down to is that Arden Lyn and Zendor wanted to start a new group that could study differently, and the masters in that time said, yeah, no, don't do that. But Lyn and Zendor did anyway on the planet of Leto, and this developed into open war. Let me tell you, this war was kinda sick. The Jedi called for the complete eradication of the followers of Leto, and were pretty severe in their genocide. Their overreaction would eventually lead to what we now know as the Sith Order, but that's a little time off in a completely different video. Okay, so we've got to be somewhere near the modern Jedi, right? Not exactly. There are multiple stories that happen between the First Schism and the events of the Clone Wars, where the Jedi and their ways were kind of obliterated by this dude and this one. But I'm going to save you some time and break it down like this. We have the First Great Schism. We covered that. I'm not doing it again. If you weren't paying attention, not my fault. The recusal time was the time when the Jedi recused, or excused, themselves from association with the Republic due to the treatment of non-human people by the Pious Day. This would go on for about 8 centuries. The Second Schism, when a group of Jedi who were practicing the forbidden form of alchemy and dark force power split off from the main Jedi. This would become known as the 100 Years' War later on. The Great Hyperspace War, a war that was technically between the Galactic Republic and the ever-growing Sith Order that the Jedi eventually took part in. The Great Sith War, also known as the Fall of Freedon Nad, and the war that sprung up because of it. The Mandalorian Wars, a 16-year-long war in which the warrior culture of Mandalore decided to fight against the Republic for reasons that made a lot of sense to them at the time. The Jedi Civil War, sometimes called the War of the Starforge or the Second Sith War, revolves around the story of Revan and his declaration as the Dark Lord of the Sith. The First Jedi Purge, in which the Sith nearly obliterate the Jedi. The Great Galactic War, a 28-year-long struggle between the Sith Empire and the Grand Galactic Republic that resulted in the fall of the Sith world of Korriban that didn't really have to end but left both parties devastated and multiple worlds torn by the conflict. Yay! The Cold War, much like the era where it gets its name from, not a lot of open aggression but a lot of aggression between smaller planets that fell on either side of the line. The Galactic War, in which the barely remembered peace treaty snapped and a brand new war took place. Satele Shan said neither the Republic nor the Jedi are prepared for another war. We would lose. Billions would die. She wasn't wrong. The Fourth Great Schism, see? Schism number 4, finally there and only 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. This is yet another story of a Jedi falling to the dark side for reasons. This one was Phineas and would be known by the super thought-out name of Darth Ruin. He single-handedly started the new Sith Wars. And of course, we have the new Sith Wars, also called the Jedi Sith War, or if you happen to be Sith, the War of the Fittest, the Betrayal, and the Curse of Quelidon. This was a 1,000-year conflict between the Jedi and the Sith. Wow, guys, well done. This war ended with the ultimate defeat of the Sith, as Darth Bane and his apprentice Xana went into seclusion, which would eventually give rise to the Rule of Two. Then we have the Republic Dark Age, an era in which the Republic was so beaten down by many, many years of war, pretty much between the Jedi and the Sith, that they had no real power. This era was nuts to survive, though, and everyone was making a grab for power. The Jedi became huge in the world of politics in the hope of making some sort of order. But once they started to become Supreme Chancellors for a little too long, people started getting uncomfortable. For a group that was supposed to be peacekeepers, man, they really had a lot of war. Following up with the Ruusan Reformation, led by Sars Valorum, who was the first non-Jedi chancellor in nearly 4 centuries, by the way, he decided that enough was enough. He dissolved several standing armies and enacted a lot of reforms so that the Republic could stop killing itself. He desperately wanted a new era of prosperity and peace, and that's what the Reformations were all about. But his efforts are what crafted the Galactic Republic that we eventually see in The Phantom Menace and subsequent films. Then we come to the Great Jedi Purge. Okay, so you know how I said that this information was going to have to rely heavily on Legends lore? Yeah, this Jedi Purge is the only bit of information here that is absolutely 100% canon. This is known as Order 66, or Palpatine's Purge. It starts with the clones receiving the order to kill all Jedi, an order known by the coded designation of Order 66. The Jedi had grown to rely on the clones during the Clone Wars, and thus this first wave struck as a massive surprise. It created the Dark Lord known as Darth Vader, who would ultimately head the Purge of Jedi, though not without some difficulty. In one fell swoop, nearly 30,000 years of creation crumbled. This is where the canon stops, by the way. What follows hereafter is subject to changes made by Disney. Therefore, I will only be covering this information in very brief summaries. So, we've got the new Jedi Order. This was headed up by some guy named Luke Skywalker. I don't know, you might have heard of him. It was an attempt to recreate the old Jedi Order, but better. It was kind of a big deal. You have the Uzik-Vong War, a group of organic tech people who could not be sensed by the Force, despite the Force being able to perceive all living things and being genetically similar to humans, but whatever. They decided to obliterate the new Jedi Order and known space for reasons. But hey, at least it wasn't Jedi and Sith killing each other. Am I right? We done with that, right? No? Apparently not. We've got the lost tribe of Sith emergence. After a millennia of self-exile on a planet of Kesh, the Sith decide to jump right back into things and stir the galactic pot. Unsurprisingly, the Jedi and the Sith started to fight again. This followed up with the Sith Imperial War, in which Darth Krayt sets out to destroy the new Jedi Order, kind of like the Uzik-Vong did. Multiple factions got involved, including the Mandalorians and, hey, the Uzik-Vong, and the Fel Empire. Shenanigans ensued and ended with the massacre at Ossus. You remember Ossus, right? Where the Jedi were for like a super long time? Yeah, half the Jedi died there, and this was pretty bad news for them. Now we come to the Third Jedi Purge, also known as the Second Sith Imperial War, a continuing attempt by Darth Krayt to kill off all Jedi. But he was killed by Kate Skywalker, a direct descendant of that other Skywalker I talked about, thus leading the Jedi free to rebuild. Again. So there you have it, folks, a history and legendary future for the Jedi. I hope you found some of it enlightening, if not entertaining, and if you're interested in seeing more videos like this, go ahead and click on the subscribe box. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with you.